Is with us in person and live on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube, or wherever else you're joining us from. It's wonderful to be here, and we are in the countdown, the crunch time. Pesach is galloping through the door, and before we know it, we'll be sitting at our seders in no time and getting ready to celebrate. So in our last shiur, we started a discussion about one of the interesting features of the Seder, which is called the Afikoman. I'm going to just do a quick review to take you up to where we're holding, just to give you an idea of what we discussed and to go further in this. So the first thing we mentioned here is the idea that Talmud tells us, this thing that we grab matzahs on the night of Pesach so that the children should not fall asleep. That means we do interesting things. Today, perhaps you could say at your Seder table, you might do other interesting ideas to get the attention of your children, your grandchildren. Yes, the adult ones also need to be focused because ADD, ADHD, QP, LMNOP is something we all might grapple with. And we want to make sure that we could observe and enjoy the Seder properly and engage and be involved. So the Gemara tells us, as you can see on the screen, that this was one of the customs. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden in a Siddur Kol Yaakov on the Haggadah that there is an Ashkenazic custom that people can, for the children to snatch the Afikoman, to grab that Afikoman, and of course there are prizes and incentives. Once upon a time, maybe it was a little Casio watch or something small. Today, that won't work. You got to give them an Xbox and a Chveis Nishvas. Right? You have to really do things to get their attention. A car, a Tesla, I don't know what you could do. Bicycles, olden days. Anyways, so the Rebbe talks about this, and he says that he doesn't like the idea, even though he's seen that once the previous Rebbe related that one time as a little girl, the Rebbe Maharash's eldest, the daughter, also snatched the Afikoman. So we see that it even happened in the Hasidic circles. However, he lets us know in the Hasidic circles, this is not customary. Why? Even though they may have picked it up in other communities. Because we don't like the idea of inculcating the idea of taking what's not yours, of snatching, of theft. Now remember, because we talked about this in the last shiur, that the Seder starts off with Kaddish. Well, in fact, tomorrow, please God, we will go through the entire sequence of the Seder. I want you to come tomorrow because tomorrow is getting even closer to Pesach. So the idea is to prep for Pesach. We'll go through the Seder step by step from Kaddish, Urchatz, Karpas. That's number 3. Yachatz. We split the matzah, as you can see in this picture. And that's where the one half of the matzah is hidden for the Afikoman. What does Afikoman mean? Anyone remember? Dessert. And the other half is, the smaller half is put back into the Seder plate. And on that, it's called the Lechem Oni, the bread of poverty, with which we continue the discussion and of the Seder, right? So that all continues on the smaller matzah that is put away back inside your Seder bag. So far we're saying here that the idea is that we put away this piece of Afikoman. The question is, what is the purpose of the Afikoman? What is it about? Why do we have this piece of dessert that we're hiding away for later in the Seder? Anyone know? Well, the Gemara tells us, pardon? Tradition. But on what basis is this tradition? Most Jewish traditions have a source, a makar, it's tradition, like you say. So where does this tradition come from? Well, you don't have to look too far. You could go back onto YouTube and watch last week's shiur, or today in summary, you could see it on the screen. Says the Gemara, the whole purpose of the Afikoman. Why do we have matzah for dessert? Come on, we prefer chocolate souffle. We prefer sorbet. We prefer other goodies, ice cream. Why are we having matzah for dessert? Says the Gemara, the purpose of the matzah is actually to remind us of the Korban Pesach, which was actually the dessert in the times of the temple and before. That was to commemorate, to remember. Remember when God instructed our ancestors to bring a very special offering. Maybe we'll do another shir about that. Something that would create a very pleasant aroma throughout Egypt. And the Egyptian neighbors would come asking the Jews, why are you offering our deity as a sacrifice? What's this braai? Something you can't hide, the smell of a barbecue, as the Australians like to call it, right? Roasting a lamb. The sheep was an Egyptian deity. And it was a way for the Jewish people to say, we are no longer slaves. We are proud of who we are. We're following Almighty God's instruction. This is what we do, because the sheep is not God. The sheep is a creation of God. We worship the one and only Hashem. Yeah. Speak up. Yeah. Yeah. Ooh. Good way to bring other people to your side. Make a nice braai. Braais are always good ways to get people together. And in fact, the Korban Pesach exactly did that. It was something that brought lots of people together. In the times of the temple, the communities would gather together. You didn't just eat it yourself, you ate it with others. But here is something very interesting about the Korban Pesach that I want you to see. You see, I put it here on the screen. The holiday sacrifice, which is not the Korban Pesach, we'll get to that in a moment. That's what preceded the Korban Pesach. It was eaten first, so the Korban Pesach would be eaten afterwards. Notice the words the Talmud says, on a full stomach. You see that? On a full stomach. Okay? You got to be full before you eat it. So everybody came together for Pesach, but the Korban Pesach, the Paschal lamb, you ate on a full stomach. All right. Let's continue reading the Talmud because it gets very, very interesting what the Talmud says. Remember, you had to eat this before midnight. All right? But read the next paragraph. We do not eat, no worries. Welcome, Jill. Good to have you with us. Our newest participant and member here, Jill's husband, who was a friend of ours, Mr. Bilchitz, passed away a few weeks ago, but he was a good friend, and we wish you long life and strength. And welcome. Thank you for joining us. Please, God, you'll join us frequently. Monday through Thursday, good shiur and good food, and good food for thought. Good friends. And good friends, of course. That's the most important thing. Thank you, Miriam, for your very welcoming hospitality. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, we said that before. Unfortunately, she passed away yesterday. She was a good friend, and she spent a few Pesachs with us at our retreat. And she was just a wonderful woman. And it's so sad that she's gone so suddenly. How old was Rebbetzin anyone know? Well, in her 80s, really. She acted much younger. And I was good friends with her husband of blessed memory. I can't believe Rabbi Harris. He was a wonderful man as well. He gave me a lot of good lines. He was a very good friend. And what I loved about him, although he was so posh and proper, in other way he dressed and spoke, but he was embracing it. And a wonderful, Scottish sense of humor, right? Okay, I'm not going to digress too far because our participants here are wondering what's going on. They might not fully understand what we're talking about, but we dedicate the shir today to the memory of Rebbetzin Anna Harris. And by the way, she was a proponent of women studying more and learning Gemara, which is exactly what we're doing right now. We're not only ladies, we're also the gentlemen, but it's good for all of us to be here together and learning some Gemara. So everyone could just say a quick hello to all of our participants here. Good to see everybody and good to be learning some Talmud together. Just a second, did we just lose our charge? No, we have it here. All right, so my friends, let's look here. This is Gemara Masechet Pesachim Daf Ayin Amar Aleph, page 78. Says the Talmud that we do not eat any dessert. Ein maftirin achar haPesach korban. We do not eat any dessert after the Korban Pesach, right? So here is something that why don't we eat dessert after the Korban Pesach? The commentaries discuss this. And they tell us because on Pesach we have to eat like kings, right? One of the ways we demonstrate that is by reclining, because kings would eat in a luxuriating way, the Haseba. So one of the things we do, we would eat reclining. Another thing the Talmud tells us is that royalty can eat whether they are hungry or satiated. Ordinary people, we eat when we're hungry. Kings, royalty, they eat when they are, anytime they want, right? You want something to eat? Call the butler, or it's more comfortable to go in the kitchen yourself? No. Not allowed, okay? That's why Queen Elizabeth got faribbled with Diane. Princess Diane, she didn't do the right thing. Yeah. Says the Gemara, it's forbidden to eat anything after the Korban Pesach so as not to remove the taste. You want to go to sleep with that taste on your palate of the brai, of the sacrificial meat that you offered, the Paschal lamb. Okay? That's what the Torah, that's what the Gemara tells us. And they quote the words of the verse, Lemishcha ligedula, that for distinction, for greatness. And they tell us it means the way the kings ate. So by having, excuse me, the Korban Pesach as the last item on the menu on the eve of Pesach, back in the times of the temple when the Korban Pesach was offered, you couldn't eat anything else afterwards. Therefore, our sages tell us today, when we eat our afikoman, to commemorate, to recall, to remember the Korban Pesach sacrifice, nothing else can be eaten afterwards, as Maimonides tells us here. It is a rabbinic ordinance that nothing at all is to be eaten after the matzah. What matzah? Afikoman. We're not eating actual lamb chops today. You can have that the next day, but at your Pesach dinner, you will eat a matzah for dessert, and that's what you will conclude your Pesach dinner with. Nothing else. So it boils down to this. After you read your Haggadah, right? We did everything else in the order. Kadesh, we made Kiddush. We had 2 cups of wine. Urchat, we washed our hands. Karpas, we'll go through this whole sequence tomorrow. Please God, in greater detail. Karpas, we dipped our vegetable in the salt water. We remembered the tears of our ancestors. We'll give you more commentaries on that. Yachatz, we split the matzah. Half of it we put away for the apikoman, that will be our dessert at the end. And the other half, we're going to eat a little bit earlier. But the point is, we commemorated everything, right? We ate the maror, we recalled the bitterness. We had the Hillel sandwich. We had the egg, and everything else we do. Now for dessert, the last thing you'll eat, not the last thing you drink, because you're still going to have 2 more cups of wine or grape juice, whatever your preference is the afikoman, commemorating the Korban Pesach. Now let me ask you a question. If no dessert may be eaten after this commemorative matzah, you want ice cream, have it before. You want chocolate, we want sweets, whatever it is, eat it before. Okay? So then it means that the matzah actually is the dessert. No? And that's actually what afikoman means, as Sephora told us in Greek, Latin. What language is it? Greek. It's all Greek to me. Don't know what's going on. So if the Korban Pesach is commemorating the Pesach sacrifice, the question we're left with is, why is it saved for last? Why shouldn't the Pesach sacrifice, which was one of the main events when the Jews left Egypt, should that not be something of a main course? Shouldn't it be taking a front central point of our Pesach celebrations, right? Why do we need to eat the Korban Pesach at the end of the meal? Think about it. The matzah back then was like a lafa. It was thick. It was something that, remember the shir I gave, the different levels of matzah and everything. So you put your lamb chops in there. You had all the other goodies, the maror, which was your relish. That sounds more like a main course to me than a dessert. Yet it seems from here that this was dessert back then, not the main course. My question remains, Why do we not eat it as the main course? Why are we leaving it for the end? Questions? You're saying because you want it to stay in your mouth as that's the savoring memory. Okay, good point. Yeah.
Question and answer.
Okay, let's hear. Yes.
We do eat the matzah at the beginning of the meal.
We do. Yes, that's true. But the Korban Pesach part, the afikoman means dessert, which today is matzah, and back then was lamb chops.
I hear you. Okay, so in the beginning and
That's true in regard to the matzah, but that's not my question. My question is regard to the Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach was the sacrificial lamb that the Jews offered before they left Egypt. So it seems like a very important event that we want to commemorate. Yet, both in times of temple where they actually ate the meat, and today where we just remember it with the matzah, it is at the end. Meaning you ate a whole meal before actually. And that meal was your main course. You ate matzah gesundheit, ate matzah at the beginning, fine. But the Korban Pesach had to be eaten on a full stomach.
But on the side plate is the Korban Pesach not represented by the
Lamb chop or the neck, yeah. That's just a representation. You actually can eat matzah to commemorate that, to remember it. Remember, you're not actually eating the meat. So we remember the meat by looking at it. And vegetarians are better off now because they could eat matzah instead of the meat. But back then, you had to actually eat the meat. I don't know what a vegetarian did in the times of the temple. Yeah, we don't eat roasted meat on Pesach evening now. Why? Because we have to remember that we miss the temple. We miss the temple, and therefore we're not going to eat actually roasted meat. But to commemorate it, we do two things. We look at the shenkpon that you're saying, and we eat the matzah. But what I'm telling you is that it's not only today that the matzah that's afikomen at the end. I'm bringing you back to the times of the temple. The actual sacrificial meat, the lamb chops call it, was eaten for dessert. And the Torah tells us that as a distinction, it had to be the last final item you ate that day. And you had to eat it on a full stomach. So you actually ate a big meal before, but only now are you eating only now are you actually eating this meat when you're already full. It seems a little bit, I don't know what you want to call it, oxymoronic. Like, why would you, if it's so important to remember this, why did you have to eat it when you were full? Generally speaking, when you're full, you want ice cream, you want something light, not meat. We're royalty. So that's one answer, but I want to now take it in another direction. A law about Shabbos that I'm going to put on the screen. And the truth is, this law about Shabbos is also about Pesach. Let me start straight out now. You know, you're not supposed to eat matzah now. If you want knedlach gesundheit, especially in the Chabad tradition where we don't eat knedlach on Pesach, why don't we eat knedlach on Pesach? That should be another shiur. In a nutshell, there was a concern, according to some opinions, that perhaps matzah, now let me tell you, fully baked matzah cannot become chametz. However, some were of the opinion that maybe there was some flour that was left on the matzah that did not get baked, and therefore that flour mixing with water could actually become chametz. It was a minority opinion, but because we're particularly strict on Pesach, when it comes to any other foods, there's a law called batul b'shishi. Food can become nullified 1 in 60. I have a great story to share with you. I read to my kids the other day, so let me tell it to you. Coming from Purim. In Jerusalem, about 100 years ago, more, 120, sometime in the late 1800s, the community was getting ready for their big Purim feast. The whole community would get together, sort of like what we had last week at our shul. We had a Persian chef come and prepare a whole gastronomic wonderland of Persian dishes that you never got to taste before. It was really nice and unique. Well, the ladies of Jerusalem, I don't know which community, Mea Sha'arim, they got together to prepare all types of delicious, delectable, wonderful dishes, fleischig, for the Purim meal, including kreplach and I don't know what other goodies, really nice food. There was one problem. You know, it can happen sometimes that somehow there was a bucket of milk that burst. I don't know exactly how, I wasn't there, but somehow the milk got strewn into the meat. When I was a kid, I remember going to a bar mitzvah we were going to a classmate, a friend of ours. His family was hosting us. They lived in another neighborhood. So we all went there for Shabbos. His father was a rabbi at a big shul, and they were hosting us. What do you got? A bunch of 13-year-old kids Friday afternoon. So they gave us pizza for lunch. And in the kitchen, there were the mother or caterer, I don't know who, was preparing a big fleshig dinner. And we were eating our pizzas. And then afterwards, one of my friends took they gave us the pizzas on foils, like aluminum foil. And one of my friends took a couple of those foils, put them together into a nice ball, and chucked the ball towards the garbage. But guess where it landed? Not in the garbage bin, but in the chicken soup. Oy vey. But that's when I learned this rule properly. The rabbi, who was the head of the home, the balabayit, he said, don't worry, it's batul b'shishim. You know what batul b'shishim means? It becomes nullified if there's 60 times more meat than milk, even though there was cheese residue in the pizza foils. But, how do you measure? How do you know? Anyways, the story happened in Jerusalem then that somehow a bucket of milk burst open, and it spilled into this big pot of meat dish, and the ladies didn't know what to do. What are they going to do? And they came quickly running to the rabbi of Jerusalem, forget which rabbi it was. They asked him, and he looked into the matter, and he said, don't worry, it's batul b'shishim. They weren't so sure. You see, when it's clear, like it's just a piece of foil with a little bit of cheese, it's not good. We don't eat cheeseburgers, But it was easy to tell that it's just a little bit of cheese that fell into a big pot of chicken soup. You could tell that there's for sure 60 times more. But obviously in Jerusalem, it was a large quantity of milk that fell into the pot. And they came to ask the rabbi, and the rabbi had to examine this, and he had to figure it out. So how did he figure it out? He refused to let them know. One day, the former milkman in the community was dying. And on his deathbed, he called over some people, and he said, I want to tell you about our rabbi, how special he is. I want you to know this. You remember that Purim a few years ago, he said, when the milk burst open and went into the pot of meat, and there was a big question what to do. So the rabbi came to me. And the rabbi asked me a question. He asked me, do you ever dilute the milk? And I had to be honest, and I told him that I do, because I need to spread my sales. Now, I guess today, if you're buying a bottle of milk and it tells you X amount of water is in there and it's diluted, they got away with it legally. But a man who's selling you a bucket of milk and it turns out that it's actually milk mixed with water, So the rabbi said to him, you saved the day, but don't do it again. So when it comes to milk and meat, if there's 60 times meat over milk, and certainly with other forbidden products as well, that's not a problem. However, when it comes to Pesach, we know that the rule is that chametz is not batal. It doesn't get nullified in anything. A little bit of chametz is completely forbidden. You find a little bit of chametz somehow, God forbid, gets mixed into your soup or who knows what. The whole dish is forbidden on Pesach, and you have to get rid of it. That's why we do a burning chametz ceremony in Erev Pesach. So when it comes to knedlach are not chametz, don't worry. However, in the Hasidic tradition, we don't eat them on Pesach, except for the last day. The reason is because there was once a concern, a chashash it's called, a worry that maybe there was a little bit of flour that wasn't nullified, that somehow didn't get baked. So because there was this concern that was brought up, the Hasidic tradition is, and many other Charedim don't eat gebrakt, which is anything that's mixed. Gebrakt literally means actually it's broken. It's talking about broken matzah, probably referring to like matzah flour. What's matzah flour or matzah meal? It's matzah that was ground. We don't use that we don't mix it with any water in order to ensure that if there was a little bit particle of flour that didn't get properly baked, right? It's a chashash of a chashash, which means a concern, a worry, but on Pesach, we are very strict. And that's why on Pesach, we will not eat any gebrakt, anything like that. If that's your tradition, matova manayim. Pardon? Yeah, it certainly grows and it gets inflated. And the idea of chametz versus matzah, chametz symbolizes the idea of something that leavens, that's inflated. It's like our ego. arrogance, which is an unwanted character trait, whereas matzah is supposed to be flat, symbolizing humility. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Based on that, my friends, we said that from now to Pesach, we actually don't eat matzah. Why? We want to have a hearty appetite for the matzah. Halachically speaking, that only applies to the day of Pesach. It's a Hasidic tradition already from a month before. Since we don't eat Knedlach on Pesach anyhow, so you can have Knedlach between now and Pesach too. Yeah. So the idea that I'm emphasizing is the appetite that you want to build up. Okay? So that being the case, we said that the afikoman must come at the end, when basically your belt buckles are popping, right? Why? It seems contrary to this halachic principle. What's the halachic principle? That when it comes to Shabbos, just like the matzah, we don't eat between now and Pesach because you want to have an appetite for it. What's the law of Shabbos? And Shabbos is prominent in this week's parsha again. There's a concept of refraining from eating a meal on a Friday afternoon. Did you know that? On Friday afternoon, you shouldn't eat a big meal. Why? The reason is because we're supposed to enter Shabbos. Exactly. You want a robust, good appetite called lete'avon. In lete'avon means that you should have a good appetite. Here it is in the halacha. This is the Mishnah. Let me just read it to you. The Mishnah says, on Shabbos Eve, one should not eat anything other after the time of mincha, which is afternoon, so as to enter Shabbos with an appetite. It doesn't mean you have to fast, but it means we don't eat an actual meal. Okay, what's a meal? You could eat, you could drink, but you don't eat a full proper meal. We don't wash for bread on Shabbos on Friday afternoon. Okay, and obviously there's two opinions. I mean, Rabbi Yossi says you can eat till nightfall, but the point is that even though Rabbi Yossi permits it, the halacha actually is that you should avoid eating a meal if possible. This is what the Alter Rebbe rules in Shulchan Aruch, and Jewish mothers have known this intuitively for generations, making, you have a whole full feast, a 3-course dinner for Shabbos, and everyone's going to come home, the family, the guests, everyone who comes. It's a delicious meal to honor Shabbos, right? So don't eat a big meal on Friday afternoon. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to play it safe and call it tradition,
Okay.
that it is a mitzvah to taste the Shabbos food before Shabbos.
It's not a contradiction. Toyameha. I do it every Friday. In fact, my wife gives me, it's my job to make sure she makes the soup and she makes the food. She wants my opinion before. She says, if you're not going to taste it before and tell me how you like it, I'm not going to know how good it is. Trust me, I know it's good. All right? I know your food is always good. But there is a concept called toyameha. First of all, the Gemara says, if you don't prepare before Shabbos, how are you going to have food? Second of all, you want to make sure it tastes perfectly well. There's stories about being too salty or underspiced. So look, my mother had a general rule. She actually made the soup somewhat bland. You could always add salt and pepper. You can never take anything out. But yes, it's not a contradiction to what you're saying. Toyameh means you tasted it to make sure it's good. Doesn't say in the Gemara you should fast on Erev Shabbos, but you shouldn't eat an abundant meal because you don't want to come into Shabbos. I'm not hungry. I don't want to eat. Imagine you came home and you're not in the mood of the meal. We honor Shabbos with a big meal. Okay, it's a separate discussion how healthy that is for you. Okay, if it's a health matter, then be careful with what you eat. Don't overdo it. There's no mitzvah you have to overdo it, but there is a mitzvah that you should eat it. You should eat. If you ate before, you're not going to have an appetite for this meal, all right? So it's not a contradiction. The question I have, which does seem like a contradiction to me, is why, when it comes to the Korban Pesach, to the Paschal Lamb, which is also a big and important mitzvah, it's a biblical commandment, right? It's a main staple of the Pesach Seder, not only today, but back in the times of the temple, even the more so, that you had to eat it on a full stomach. Why would you have to do that? At the end of a delicious 3-course meal, not only usually we don't have an appetite anymore, but we find it difficult to eat. I mean, if I'm full, I can't eat. So it seems contrary to the rule we say about Shabbos, right? And even to some degree about Pesach, which we know you're not supposed to eat the main staple ingredients of your Seder on Erev Pesach. This, we're royalty, yes? Okay, so Tzipora is referring us back to the rule that the Gemara said. The Talmud says that royalty can eat whenever they want. If a regular poor person eats when they're hungry, but royalty eats whenever they want, however they want. Call the butler, I want something now, but you're not hungry. Doesn't matter if you're hungry or not. That's what you do at a Pesach retreat. At a Pesach retreat, what do we give you between meals? Full house tea room. In the tea room, you can have a piece of cake, you can have whatever. There's lots of goodies. There's ice cream, there's cappuccinos, there's fruit platters, there's fruit juices, there's veggie platters, whatever you want to eat. You're not hungry, you ate already, doesn't matter. I could see on a retreat, people want their full money's worth. They make sure to eat and eat and eat. So we have to understand this seems like a shtickle contradiction. Why, when it comes to Shabbos, you need to have a hearty appetite. When it comes to the Korban Pesach, we say you eat on a full stomach. Yeah, that's the question. We're ready for the Gemara. Let's go into the Gemara. So let's start with an interesting passage from the Talmud. We'll read it, we'll analyze it, we'll discuss it. Let's see. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba bar bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara asks a question. My dichsiv, it says in a verse, this is a verse in the prophet Hosea, who says, Ki yesharim darkei Hashem, for the paths of God are right. V'tzadikim yelchu bam, and the just will walk in them. Upaishim michashu, but transgressors stumble over them. Says the Talmud, this is analogous to a case of two people who each roasted their Korban Pesach. One ate it for the sake of the mitzvah, while the other ate it for pleasure. Of the one who ate it for the sake of the mitzvah, the verse states, and the just walk in them. Of the one who ate it for the sake of pleasure, the verse states, but transgressors stumble in them. Interesting. Comes along Rashi. Rashi tells us, while the other ate it for pleasure, Rashi explains, hungrily, to satisfy the desire. So this goes back to what the rule is. The Korban Pesach, you don't eat hungrily or gluttonously. You don't gobble it up like you're just, oh, I'm famished, I'm starved. Because then you're eating just for your own pleasure. Eat it rather because it's a mitzvah, it's a divine commandment. That's why you eat it. Yeah.
In the story, in the Torah story,
Yeah.
of the night before the Yidden were ordered to make the Pesach lamb and to eat it completely. And if they couldn't, as a family, eat it completely, two families should get together to make sure that it's completely finished.
Consume, exactly.
How does that fit in now with what you're saying about the
Okay. It's, again, the same idea, because actually the Afikoman back in the times of the temple until it was destroyed was that everybody gathered together. And if you, like you're saying, if you couldn't eat it yourself, you brought others to join with you. First, you ate a full meal. Now, obviously in Egypt, this is a commemoration of what happened in Egypt. Then they also had to eat it full. But then well, that was before the temple. When they actually had the commandment to eat it in Egypt, that wasn't a commemoration yet. Then they actually did the mitzvah. So whether they were hungry then or not is irrelevant. We're saying now that you eat it, don't eat it hungrily. Now to commemorate, to remember the commandment of eating it in Egypt, for that, you can't do it as a glutton, hungrily. You have to eat it when you're full already. So to say, like the rich people or royalty, you could eat whenever they want.
Wasn't there a command also to finish it?
Yes.
Whether you are hungry or not, you have to finish it.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly the point. Yeah. So that's a commemoration of that symbolism as well. Just like we're leaning, we're reclining, we're doing certain acts to symbolize that we're no longer slaves, right? We are royalty. We're rich today. We're no longer dependent on our Egyptian taskmasters to tell us what to do. We do what Hashem tells us to do. You know, I'm reminded, my father told us a story that there was once a young guy who was passing through a certain town during his travels. So one of the balabatim and shul sees a new face. He invites him over. He says, come join us for dinner. You know, back in the day, you saw a new face. And the truth is, if you come to my shul, we always have visitors from all over the world. Thank God we're more like, Sancton Central, the Grand Central. Anyways, they invite him over to their house. He's a new face, a guest in town. They're sitting down at the meal. And as the first course is being served, the hosts began the typical, round of Jewish geography, from Vanenkum Tayid, where you coming from? So he says, I come from Minsk. Oh, you come from Minsk? That's wonderful. So I have a cousin in Minsk, Reb Yankel. Reb Yankel, how's he doing? So I'm so sorry to tell you, the guest says, but he's dead. Woo! And they heard that her cousin's dead. You can imagine she's I don't know how you describe the shock in her face. In the meantime, the guest is gobbling up the food. He starts eating the fish and the salad and everything that's at the table. And the hostess is devastated, right? And she doesn't even know what to do with herself. Her cousin, Yankel's dead. She never even heard about it. Now the husband speaks up and he says, tell me, what about my friend Velvel? My friend Velvel, how's he doing? I haven't seen him in years. Is he doing well? Did he ever marry off his daughter? What was Tavia's daughter's name? Tybal. Huh? What? Zeitel, that's what it is. Zeitel. I mean, Chaim Potek just passed away. We have to remember him a little bit. She says, I'm sorry to tell you, the guest says again, but your cousin Velvel is dead. The man can't believe it. The host now is shaking. Now his good friend is dead. In the meantime, the guest is devouring the food, the chicken soup that they serve with the knedlach and the croutons and everything else. And he's freezing, and his hosts are deeply saddened. And you can imagine how they're feeling. They're crying away there in the kitchen. And now they bring in the main course and they ask him about their mechutim, their relative, what happened to Tybal and the other one. I'm forgetting of names, and we need some good names. What was Chaim Patek's name? Tevye, right? So he said, how are they doing? Again, he says, sorry to tell you, they're dead. And while he's stressing, they're crying. And finally they tell him, how's it possible that all their friends, all their relatives, everyone they know is dead? So the guest says, very simple, as ich ess, when I'm eating, then alle gestorben, no one else exists, everyone's dead. Okay, it's a terrible story, right? But here you have two people doing exactly the same thing. What, right? One is viewed as righteous, as the Gemara says in this text here, and the other is a transgressor. What makes one righteous and another a transgressor? So the Talmud tells us the difference. They're both eating, but one, it's in their intentions, how they are, right? Are you eating for the sake of a mitzvah, or are you eating just to be a glutton, to just devour the food? The Korban Pesach must be delicious, no doubt. If you like lamb chops and you don't get too much gout and you're not a vegetarian and all the other things, it smells delicious and I'm sure it tastes delicious, right? But if all I care about when I'm eating is how it tastes, right, then I'm missing the point completely. The point is to eat in order to fulfill the mitzvah, the divine commandment, not for me to fress, right? And it's true that eating the Pesach, the Korban Pesach, is a mitzvah, right? Just like eating your Shabbos meal is a mitzvah. But there's a key difference between them. At the Shabbos meal, the mitzvah is to enjoy the food and enjoy it in honor of Shabbos Kodesh. How do you honor Shabbos? By eating a meal, our sages tell us. But on Pesach, the mitzvah is to eat the sacrifice. You understand the difference? The personal enjoyment here is not the objective. On Shabbos, the objective is to enjoy. It's about Oimek Shabbos, the more delicious food. Yes, but it's got to be food that you enjoy, right? The mitzvah is to enjoy it. On the Korban Pesach, the mitzvah was not to enjoy it. The mitzvah was to eat it. So enjoy your meal before the Korban Pesach, before the Afikoman. Make sure it's delicious. But when it comes to the Korban Pesach itself, that the mitzvah is not to enjoy, the mitzvah is to eat. Eating, not to enjoy, but to connect to the divine, that is the key. Let's read it in the Rebbe's words. Let me share with you the Rebbe's teaching. Says the Rebbe, the Korban Pesach must be eaten on a full stomach, as is the law, unlike Shabbos, which should be eaten when hungry to satisfy the appetite. One of the reasons for this is to demonstrate that the Korban Pesach is being eaten for the sake of the mitzvah, not for the sake of our own bodily pleasure. So much so, the body's interest is completely ignored. Even if the body is full and doesn't want to eat more, one nevertheless eats the Korban Pesach with the same gusto as he would if he were hungry. Now, the difference is, don't eat it if you're hungry. Eat it when you're not hungry. Furthermore, even though one is not hungry when eating the Korban Pesach, nevertheless, what do we say? It is eaten with tremendous joy, right? With tremendous joy. Now, not all mitzvahs are difficult. Some of them, in fact, you could say, are very much enjoyable, right? Korban Pesach sounds like an enjoyable mitzvah. Tastes good. You're with family, you're with friends, the more the merrier, especially since you might not be able to eat that whole thing. So invite more friends over. Enjoying a mitzvah is fine, and it's good, and it's encouraged. But when we get too caught up in the pleasure of the experience, we could lose sight of the true value of that mitzvah. And then it becomes about us. It becomes about, what am I enjoying? Just remember that this is a divine commandment. And in order to avoid that aspect, the Torah teaches us to go to the other extreme, and we eat the afikoman in a way that it ignores the body altogether. When we're full, when the body isn't even interested anymore, and to be able to eat it nonetheless, and with great joy, that is to be able to appreciate what a mitzvah is all about, connecting with a divine will. It's not about me, it's not about what I'm enjoying, it's about doing what Hashem wants. And in this sense, the Korban Pesach is pointing to this fascinating and crucial pathway in the way we serve Hashem, which is, it's not about me. It's not about me. It's about what God wants, right? The inherent problem that we're all born to solve is that dichotomy between heaven and earth, between soul and body, between our spiritual pursuits and our animalistic tendencies. The whole of divine service is about finding a way to bring peace between the body and the soul. But how can there ever be such a peace if the body and soul are so diametrically opposed to each other, if they're so opposite, right? The body desires earth and the soul, heaven. The soul wants to break free. It's all about me. Sorry, it's not about me. And the body is trapping it, is holding it back. So how's it supposed to work? What can we do to make that experience the synthesis, to collaborate the two together? Now, for some people, the only imaginable way is to pick one side of the conflict and to say, I'm spiritual, or I'm physical, I spend all day in yeshiva, I never go to yeshiva. But that's silly, because then I'm separating the two that should really be together as one, right? And that's not the ideal. The ideal is that we should infuse the two. It shouldn't be a separation of body and soul. So, by definition, in promoting the soul, there's resistance maybe from the body, and maybe the other way, if I'm focused on the body, my soul gets ignored. So we have to find a way that the struggle of the soul and the body, which is a constant struggle that we all have. If you study Tanya, we know that Tanya talks a lot about this, right? And some of us will never truly emancipate the soul. We're simply not wired for perfection. We are human beings after all. But human beings at the end of the day, have the ability, we are capable of working the two together. And the awareness of how far we are from our spiritual goals, on the one hand, can be excruciating and demoralizing, and thinking that I have such a way to go. But if I just focus on the goal and work the two together, we'll get there. Okay? Yeah. What? It's okay, Claudia. Let people ask, please. Yeah. 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 You get a lot of visitors, sure.
They come and they only go to the so when you do starting with a higher stuff,
Okay.
that's very good.
I can't speak for others. Okay. Okay. Okay, I can't speak for others. Maybe some people, Tzipora is saying that some people go straight to Kiddush. They don't spend time on Shalom Aleichem and Eshet Chayil, and they go straight to the meal, because by taking care of the physical well-being of the body, by the way, that's not contradictory to what we're saying here. Because what are we saying? Eat a full meal, have a whole dinner, and only then your body's taken care of, and then your body satiated. Now you can eat for the divine purpose. So it's not a contradiction. So on that note, I'm going to, in Tanya, we know the Alter Rebbe teaches that it's not a contradiction, even though this seems like a dichotomy of the body and soul. Of course, the challenges are there, and maybe they'll never go away. Maybe we'll always have that friction between our body and soul. But there is a secret weapon in our arsenal that we mustn't forget. That sometimes, Tanya says, ignore the body. How? No, I'm not perfect. But that doesn't mean I can't celebrate the successes that my soul achieves. There are certain successes of the soul. I heard the other day about a particular family that was having a struggle, and they overcame that particular spiritual battle they were having. I won't go into details. So they had a victory party to celebrate collectively as a family for that triumph that they all overcame. We have to reward our soul sometimes. So this idea, Tanya says, celebrate your soul's achievements. Don't say I'm such a lowly person that I never get to succeed. Let's read it here in the Rebbe's teachings, and there's a few more texts I want to go through. It says, let's explain the notion of ignoring the body when eating the Korban Pesach in terms of our personal religious experience. By the way, when else do we ignore the body, but in a very different way? Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, we ignore the body the other way. How do we ignore the body on Yom Kippur? By afflicting it. No eating, no marital relations, no leather shoes of comfort, no fragrances, no rinsing. So we do it the other way. Interesting. It's exactly 6 months apart, Pesach and Yom Kippur. We do two diametrically different ways of putting the body aside. But Yom Kippur, technically, we do that as well. On Yom Kippur, we ate the whole day before Yom Kippur. And then for the 25 hours of Yom Kippur observance, we say to the body, you ate enough. Now I'm focusing on my soul. Same thing we're doing here in a sense, but in a different way. We're saying to the body, eat a whole big meal that the body will enjoy. And now I'm focusing on the soul. But we're doing this not by eating, not by fasting, but by eating. Just interesting. Let's go back into the text and we'll discuss this a little bit more. It says it's true that the divine service is mainly about perfecting the body. You're eating after all. Yet everyone knows full well that their personal body and animal soul may not be spiritually up to par. Maybe yours is. I know I'm not. Regardless, one ought to serve God with fervor and joy. thus ignoring the spiritual imperfection of the body. It might drag me down to think that, oi, I'm bad. Oi, I make mistakes. Oi, I'm not a perfect Jew. All these concerns are real. Sorry, I put you on the wrong text. Here we are. These are all real concerns. Yet the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, true, the body may be abominable and loathsome, yet let his divine soul be more precious to him than his loathsome body, and rejoice in the observance of Torah mitzvahs without letting the sadness on account of the lowly state of the body interfere with or disturb the joy of the soul. As explained elsewhere, it is possible for a person to have weeping lodge in one side of the heart and joy lodge in the other. Is it not possible for me to acknowledge my shortcomings, but yet also to be aware of all of my achievements and successes? If I'm honest with myself, nobody's perfect, but nobody's a complete failure. We might fail, but failing is, as I said many times, failure is not getting knocked down. Failure is only if you stay down. So in other words, instead of being sad on account of the body, yes, I know my body likes this, that, and the other. And I might get obsessed with that. The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, it's better to rejoice on account of the soul. And the fact that the soul that you have placed in me is pure. We said it in the morning in prayers today, right? While there's a part of me that thinks, oh, what a failure, what a miserable, the mistakes I make. Don't focus on your mistakes. The soul that God gave us is pure. There's plenty good about us. So every time we do a mitzvah, actually, we are fulfilling a divine commandment. And the soul experiences that bliss. It's having a party. Soul's having a party. We did a mitzvah. We did what God wants. The body has issues. Okay, you work on it with time. But if right now your soul is a reason to celebrate, that's a time to ignore the body and to not let it ruin the party. Don't let our shortcomings get in the way. Yeah, but the point is that here is a time to celebrate the soul, okay? And this is something we can learn from the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach is eaten on a full stomach. You're already satiated. It's the notion of telling the body and animal soul, even for a short while, that I don't need you. I have a lot going on for me spiritually speaking. Thank you very much because I have a soul. So I took care of my body's needs. I ate a whole big meal. And now it's not about the food for my body. It's about the soul. It's about what God wants. So eating the Korban Pesach on an empty stomach would be inviting, so to say, an unwanted guest to the party who would make problems. My physical body's concerns. As long as the body has an appetite, I could become a gluttonous fresser, a grabjung. Know what that means? Certain Yiddish words are hard to translate. Okay? How much of this mitzvah is for God, for the godly part? How much is for my body? I convince myself I'm coming to eat for God, but really I'm enjoying a nice bride. So instead, we send the body away for a bit, not by starving it, but by giving it a delicious three-course Seder meal. That's what we're doing. And we let it wander off, enjoy, and now we're eating on a full stomach, right? When we go back to the story, it comes to mind, my father saying about this young traveler, when I eat, everyone's dead, right? There's a man who could tune out of the whole experience that he's enjoying a delicious meal. Everyone else is dead when he eats. But here we're speaking of someone who can tune out of the whole physical experience of eating. I'm doing a mitzvah. When I eat, I'm doing it because Hashem wants. That's why he's eating. Now, of course, one wonders, what about Shabbos? What about Shabbos? Don't we say every Shabbos you should eat so that you will have a full stomach? You shouldn't eat before so you'll have a good appetite. The 3 meals are to enjoy Shabbos, enjoy the food, right? So what about Shabbos? If the benefits of ignoring the body when eating the sacrifice are so great, why do we make a point of building our appetites on Friday afternoon by not eating a full meal, right? So why is that part of the Onyx Shabbos? That's my question to you. What's different about eating on Shabbos, that on Shabbos we don't have the same rule. So ladies and gents, let's explore why it is acceptable and desirable to eat the Shabbos meal with a big hearty appetite, even though Pesach, we eat the Korban Pesach or the Afikoman today only once you're full. All right. We're not done. We're going to conclude at this point with a few more texts to analyze and practical lessons to take home with, that we could really enjoy the mitzvah and apply it to our life. So the question we have is why on Friday, why Shabbos is different, right? Now, the purpose of life and the purpose of our entire religious experience is to introduce the joy of a mitzvah into this world. We want to fulfill our divine mission, purpose, why we're here. And the point is to teach the body that it's not foreign to the soul, but the body and soul have to work together. They work in tandem with each other, right? For a soul to remain a soul without achieving anything in this world, it wouldn't need to come down into this world in the first place. The whole purpose why God put our soul in a body is so that they could work with each other. So by enjoying a delicious Shabbos meal with a good hearty appetite and commemorating that God created the world in 6 days and rested on Shabbos the 7th, we are inviting our bodies, which work a whole week, which is part of the divine commandments. It's this week's parsha again. We're inviting the body to join in the soul's experience of Shabbos, right? So this is what we read right here. The prophet Isaiah tells us about how the ability to merge our body and soul in celebrating God. Okay, this is where all the magic happens. Let's read the verse together in Tashiv Meshabbos Raglecha. If you restrain your foot because of Shabbos from performing your affairs on my holy day, and you call Shabbos a delight, the holy of God honored, and you honor it by not doing your wanted ways, by not pursuing your affairs and speaking words. Then you should delight with God, and I will cause you to ride on the high places of the land, and I will give you to eat the heritage of Yaakov your father. The mouth of God has spoken. Now think about this. Why does God raise a person up and grant him the heritage of Yaakov, our father? Right? When he not only keeps the letter of Shabbos law, but what do we say? When you delight in Shabbos. That's the words, V'karasa Shabbos oneg, that you experience a delight in Shabbos. Okay? Exactly. It's called oneg Shabbos, when we delight, when we eat all that good food. So it's when a person gets a real pleasure, body and soul, both together, enjoying the double, the Neshama Yisera. Is it 2 souls or is it extra soul? Because you're focusing on the soul. Yeah. Exactly. Uverachta, don't forget, then you have to bench. Okay. Then you granted this extra special portion of Yaakov, that extra soul, in order to experience the extra soul, which is why we all put on weight by the time Shabbos is done. Somehow, every time I go on the scale, I never go Saturday night. That's terrible. You know, on Shabbos, you don't put on weight. It's only after Shabbos when you step on the scale. You have a whole week to lose it afterwards. Pardon? Oh, let's hear. I want to hear it.
When you eat on Shabbos,
Yeah.
it takes time for your body to process the food. It only becomes weight and fat the day off.
I hear you.
Unless you want to do it first.
So this is what we are told, delight in the Shabbos, right? And delight by making sure both body and soul get to experience this. Let's read what the Gemara tells us, says Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Yossi. Anyone who delights in Shabbos is granted a boundless portion, as the verse states. If you restrain your foot because of Shabbos, we just read this text before, then you should delight with God. And I will cause you to ride on the high places of your land, and I will give you the heritage of Yaakov your father. The reward for delighting in the Shabbos is not like the reward of Abraham, of whom the verse says, rise, walk through the land, through the length and its width, because I have given it to you. Nor is it like the reward of Yitzchak, of whom the verse states, for I will give all these lands to you and your offspring. Rather, the reward for one who delights in Shabbos is like the reward of Yaakov, of whom the verse states, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. So what kind of reward are we discussing here? Well, guess what? The Talmud describes it in glowing terms. Let's put it on the next text. Here is what the Gemara tells us. Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak said, one who delights in the Shabbos is rescued from the oppression of exile. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, whoever delights in the Shabbos is granted his heart's desires. As the verse says, you should delight in God and he will grant you your heart's desires. Now the delight in God, what does it refer to? Verse says, and you should call the Shabbos a delight. Hence, one must say, it is the delight of Shabbos. So very interesting what the Gemara is telling us here, right? And you want to know the best part? To earn this reward, we're not talking about climbing mountains, lifting weights, or studying hundreds of folios of the Talmud or books of Jewish literature or everything else. We're talking about very simple, basic, enjoyable stuff. Enjoying Shabbos, the stuff you would find at a delicious Shabbos meal that we all love to enjoy. As the Talmud continues, let's read it here. With what does one delight in the Shabbos day? Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel bar Seilat, said in the name of Rav, with a dish of beets. What do we eat today that's like a dish of beets? A dish of beets? You know, I used to sing a song to my grandmother. Oh, Bubby, oh, what I like. A Shabbos dish with gefilte fish with a little grain on the side and the chillin' in the pot and the kugel nice and hot. Oh, think about all those wonderful things you like, the flanken and the tzimis and the kugel and the chillin' and the salads and all the wonderful things. It's delicious. Says the Gemara, we should have lots of fish, heads of garlic. Ah, geschmack. Mix it into the baba ganush. Oh, is it tasty? Rav Chia bar Ashi said in the name of Rav, even something small which is made for the honor of Shabbos is called a delight. What's an example of something small? Rav Papa said, small fried fish. Whatever tickles your fancy, my friends, that's the point. The idea is enjoy your Shabbos. Make it a delight. So how does this work? How does chrein and fish and heads of garlic, using the Gemara's language, literally quoting it. You know, these are things that we human beings can enjoy. You know, there's nothing spiritual about it. The spiritual part is the vodka, the whiskey you have, right? How does this become of your divine, exalted service of Hashem, the Gemara seems to be saying? And yet the Talmud tells us that this is the mitzvah, to eat, to enjoy what your body enjoys. Which we know it's not only about the food, there's all types of physical pleasure on Shabbos. There's a mitzvah on Friday night for husbands and wives to cohabit together. It's about delighting in Shabbos. The mitzvah component elevates the entirety of Shabbos. The mitzvah of Shabbos is to enjoy Shabbos. That's the point of Shabbos. Enjoy it. That's okay. So that's a halachic matter as well. The gefilte fish is already deboned. So you won't have the bones in there. You don't have to do borer selecting it out. But whatever you enjoy, if you don't like fish, don't eat fish. If you don't like meat, don't eat meat. You're not supposed to eat something you don't enjoy because Shabbos is about enjoyment, right? But on a deeper level, the Baal Shem Tov taught that when we eat, it's not just because our body is hungry. It's because the neshama, our soul, is hungry. When you feel your appetite building, you're feeling a byproduct of your soul's desire to elevate the divine purpose in the food that you're about to eat. And that's true on any day of the year. But on Shabbos, our soul is elevated to a whole new level. We're in tune with the spiritual pursuit of the soul on Shabbos. So the body's whole appetite becomes a finer form. It's all about being in tune with it. Which, if you're getting hungry now to eat Vussi's lunch, we're coming up, we're about to end today's shiur, so we'll get there. Let's see it in the Rebbe's words. He says, eating on Shabbos is different than eating during the week. So what you're going to eat now from Vusi, as delicious as it is, it's definitely not the same as Shabbos. Even the body's physical state of hunger is more elevated on Shabbos. On Shabbos, you're not eating just because you're hungry, because your body's hungry desire for food is for the spiritual purpose. It's more elevated. It is not a hunger for bodily benefit alone, but for a mitzvah, for enjoying Shabbos. And the Rebbe says here, quoting his father-in-law, that bodily hunger for food is the result of the soul's hunger for the divine spark vested in that food. So that by eating the food, its divine purpose is realized. During the week, the body wants to eat because I'm hungry. I want. Now, it's true, the soul also wants to eat that. But from the body's perspective, it just wants to eat. I'm hungry. It's very difficult to be able to eat altruistically. The guy who's fresh in there, that meal, everybody else is dead because he's hungry. But on Shabbos, the body's very desire to eat is not just because I'm hungry. And you must have the most delectable, enjoyable foods. It's part of the soul's desire to do a mitzvah. And the mitzvah of Shabbos is to eat and to enjoy the food you eat. And therefore, enjoying food, which is somewhat of a risk during the week, is not a problem. It's in fact an exalted form of divine service in Shabbos, which is why the Talmud tells us that there were many great sages who used to starve a whole week. They wouldn't eat. In fact, I think it's in the Talmud, I'm not certain. My father used to tell us one of the great sages, he would put away his tummy. So during the week, he tucked his tummy, and I don't know how you do that, but he folded it up. During the week, we don't. Shabbos, he untucked it, and he went wild. And it wasn't his body, it was his soul. So the next time somebody told me people look gluttonous at the bracha, and not in my shul, of course, but in some other shuls. I have a friend who invented a special extendable fork. He said there's so many people around the buffet, he made an extendable fork so he could reach in, so he could get the food. He should be able to reach the food so no one else can get it. He wants to reach it. Anyways, we might be wondering who we fooling at the end of the day, right? Who's to say that when eating the delicious 3-course Shabbos meal, that the body is enjoying that celebration? Maybe it's just enjoying a good meal. I like sushi. That's why I'm eating the sushi and not the challenge. So does my body even care that it's a mitzvah? What's going on? If we're being honest, how is Shabbos dinner on Friday night any different than a braai on Sunday night? Okay, so this is where the Korban Pesach comes in, my friends. The Korban Pesach is a mitzvah that we do not when the body's hungry, but when the body is full. And in this way, it acts like an insurance policy. It's like an insurance policy for our ability to derive bodily pleasure from a mitzvah during the rest of the year. So we talked about the risk of inviting the body to the party of a mitzvah. If this is a party for the mitzvah, what's the body doing? By inviting the body, we think it might take over the show. Shabbos tells us that it's in fact possible and desirable to invite the body to the party, and demonstrates that the body can join the celebration, not only to ruin the celebration, which we're concerned about. There's a time and a place for that. And the Korban Pesach is not that time. Pesach celebrates the birth, the very beginning of the Jewish people as a nation. And with anything built to last, you have to make sure that the foundation is strong. And that's why in Tanya we learn that when the Jewish people left Egypt, they had to run away. Even though their ultimate goal was to get to Mount Sinai, to get the Torah, to elevate the world, right? But they had to get out of Egypt. They had to rush out of it because they were in a state, Egypt was a place of slavery, a place of impurity. And the first night when they experienced for the first time a profound divine revelation, it was not a time to start engaging the body. It was a time to ignore it. And that's the idea of the Korban Pesach, as explained in Tanya, celebrating the soul while ignoring the body is a form of exodus from Egypt. It was what happened on Pesach, as the verse says, the nation fled because the evil in the Jewish people was still there in full force in the left part of the heart. At that stage, the goal was to extricate the godly soul from imprisonment in the impurity of Egypt. In other words, the time of reckoning with the spiritual status of the body is throughout the year. But on Pesach, Zman Cherusenu, the season of our freedom, there's no room for worrying about the body. And this we see is why the Korban Pesach is eaten on a full stomach, ignoring the body. The Seder night is a time to work on the core. It's a time when our mitzvah excitement must only be about the soul, not about the body at all. So when we're starting off, when they left Egypt, we're not ready to invite the body to the party. Instead, we eat the Korban Pesach on a full stomach when the body's not interested, because that's a foundation, Nisan at the beginning of the year. Only once we give ourselves a good grounding in the soul on Pesach, now we're equipped to change the world during the rest of the year, which is why on Shabbos, after we learn how to experience the pure bliss of the soul, just the soul itself with the Korban Pesach, now we could start inviting the body to the party. And after we have internalized this lesson on Pesach night, which is what we do at the Seder, well, now we could teach the body that it too can appreciate and can celebrate and love a mitzvah. So my friends, let's conclude with this point here. Here, the Rebbe teaches, we've established that owing to the revelation of the divine essence on Pesach, it's not a time to focus on one's bodily state. This is emphasized, as the verse says, the nation fled because the evil in them was still fully present. Nevertheless, the ultimate goal is to serve God with the body by sublimating and refining it, taking the body along in one's service of God. And God will eliminate the spirit of impurity from the earth. Therefore, in the future redemption, the nation will not flee. When it comes to Mashiach, it says we will, for not with haste shall you go forth, and not a flurry of flight shall you go. Okay, the point is that, let's just unpack before we conclude. Let's just recap, okay? We've explained why it's important to eat the Korban Pesach on a full stomach. Why? To keep the foundation strong. And why it's important to eat the Shabbos meal, we said, with an empty stomach. Why? To let the body experience the joy of Shabbos. Now, there's a similar idea about the laws of Pesach in the prohibition of eating chametz. And there's barrels of ink have been spilled describing the dangers of chametz. What did we talk about before? Chametz is ego, it's hot air, right? On Pesach, you're not allowed any ego, no arrogance. Pesach is the time of redemption. We can't allow ourselves to exhibit any ego, right? At all. But how can we eat chametz during the rest of the year? If ego is so off limits, my question then is, shouldn't it be off limits the entire year? Why just on Pesach? What's the answer? It's the same idea. The ego is basically a fact of life. We all have egos. We all have it. We need it, in fact. We need egos to be healthy. Without ego, would any of us ever succeed at anything? If we didn't have pride, would we ever succeed in our professions, in businesses, and whatever we do? Would the world have been built up the way it is if people didn't have a little bit of pride in what they do, right? Would we bother trying to make a name, a reputation for ourselves? What would the world look like without egos? When we look at it this way, we start to see the ego as something that's acceptable. Not only acceptable, it's something desirable in a sense. So to remind us of that, we need to take that 1 week of the year, that time of Pesach, to tell us, while the ego is important, The ego is an important part of life, but also we have to know its place. So once a year, Pesach, we tell our arrogance, okay, for now, we're deflating the ego. Just for a little bit, we have to eliminate the chametz in our life. Says the Rebbe, when a person deals with chametz 11 all year long, going about his work in the mundane physical world with all the influences, it is all but impossible to avoid any trace of ego. Moreover, a person is partial to oneself and therefore liable to allow this sense of ego to become second nature and even to believe it to be acceptable. Therefore, there's a need to guard this sort of ego strongly. To this end, on Pesach Eve, one undertakes a crucial search for chametz. And one eliminates the chametz, one eliminates the ego that is amassed during the course of the year, even if the ego is minute. He then makes sure to guard himself and his surroundings from any amount of ego during the entire week of Pesach. Once you've learned the place of the ego, that the ego is good, but it has to be sublimated, then you're a good place. So to conclude, my friends, many of the mitzvahs we do are exceptionally beautiful and very much enjoyable, and that's good. When we experience a nice l'chaim and good food, or cigars, as someone was telling me before, right? It's all good. And we enjoy in the romantic beauty of Shabbos, or the joy of whatever. Think about what you enjoy most, right? It's all wonderful. And we feel good about it. And it's one of the perks of living Jewishly that there's so much to enjoy throughout the year, from one Yom Tov to the next. So I'm telling you today, the idea of today's shir is enjoy it. Find more things to enjoy. Teach others to enjoy it too, because pleasure in doing a mitzvah is a fantastic benefit, and it's the litmus test of our quest to teach the body to be on board with the soul. But while this pleasure and joy is so important and so valuable, it's important to remember that this is not the sum total of a mitzvah, of what joy I'm getting out of it. At the end of the day, why do we do a mitzvah? Because Hashem told us, and I'm fulfilling the divine will, not my own will. And this is not meant, I'm not trying to dampen anybody's excitement in any way, God forbid, but to put a check on our motives. What happens if 1 week you're not feeling this peaceful Shabbos spirit when it comes to candlelighting time? It's time to welcome Shabbos. What if the kids took up all the energy? I was just in somebody's house. She had her grandkids over for a couple of weeks. Oi, she says, time to get them out of the house. What if you're feeling frustrated, right? And you just want to curl up with a book and, right? What happens when this year's profit doesn't quite match up with last year, right? And our annual contribution to charity can't meet what, or is less exciting, less passionate about it. By the way, how do I know Batya is the best businesswoman out there? Because she pulled a profit out of the water. Yes. We search for it and burn it. Search for unwanted character traits, burn it. We should realize, as good as it is to have an ego, we also have to sublimate it. And the same thing is with all the joy. This is what the Korban Pesach teaches us. It teaches us to remember that at the end of the day, sometimes we need to ignore the body and remember what the mitzvah is really all about. So yes, enjoy the mitzvah. And when we master that and do whatever mitzvah comes our way, regardless of how it makes us feel, and we manage to celebrate it with the same fervor and excitement and flavor, and we know that we have that love and passion and enthusiasm for the mitzvah. We should do that because Hashem wants us to, not just because it makes us feel good. And then we know with the body and the soul are both enjoying it. So Pesach is the time of the year where we train ourselves. We're full. We took care of the body. It's not about the body, it's about the soul. That's why we eat the Korban Pesach on a full stomach. And then the rest of the year, we can actually invite the body to the party. That's why on Pesach, we actually sublimate our ego. And the rest of the year, we realize the ego has its place, which is why a whole year you eat challah on Friday night. Pesach, no challah Friday night. beginning of the year, it's the foundation. We have to make sure the foundation is strong. And that's why Pesach, we ignore the ego. Pesach, we ignore that part of the body's enjoyment of the meal. Although Shabbos, we will certainly enjoy the meal immensely. And we have to remember that benefit, body and soul. Shkoyach, everyone. Tomorrow, we will do prepping for Pesach. Please God, tomorrow, early enough to go through what the Seder is. We do this, we try to do it every year. It's important. Remind ourselves, go through the checklist, know what we have to shop, know what we have to prepare. And if it feels too much, then book for the Pesach retreat.